In the last video for Unit 1, we'll be talking about agriculture. Agriculture has changed a lot in modern times compared to how it was done, say, 100, 200 years ago. Most farms nowadays use lots of technology to help them make it more profitable. There's also been this push to diversify so that you're not just selling products to, say, grocery stores, but you're also having shops where maybe you make something and then you sell it, or you have it go to a farmer's market. There's also more use of genetic technology to make crops more resistant to insects or require less water or to grow bigger or different things like that. And then we've seen this sort of recent surge of organic farming. We'll talk about organic farming as well and some of the differences between that and the more industrial type farming. So industrial, also called commercial farming, you can see here on the left, is the mass production of food. It uses lots and lots of heavy equipment, more energy, more water is used, so that's where you have heavy irrigation. It tries to grow crops year-round. It doesn't matter when the season is, you'll have crops grown year-round. And typically you have these huge, huge fields, and so you might have more forests getting cut down because of these massive monocultures, which you have one crop planted for, I don't know, a mile or so, and they're really huge. Organic farming is better for the environment, no question about it. It uses less chemicals. In some cases, no chemicals, but usually it uses some, just less. There are certain types of chemicals that are permitted for organic farming and others are not. There are different techniques that are used, like crop rotation and drip irrigation, which we'll talk about, to help minimize the impact on the environment. And typically, organic farming is a little bit smaller, more local, not always, but you have more support overall for those smaller farms with organic farming. Over the last 150 years or so, we've seen this inversion here, where the number of farms in the past used to be increasing, but then it began to decrease and the size of the farms got to be more and more. So nowadays we have a lot fewer farms, but each farm is much bigger. So we've kind of transitioned away from the era of having family farms. And I actually grew up in a very rural area. I was 9 miles east of the nearest town, and the nearest town had a population of 450 people. Most of my friends were farmers, classmates were farmers, and I saw how, as I grew up, our community got less and less individuals wanting to farm. And so rural communities are kind of not doing so well because they're losing a lot of this farming, this family farm culture that persisted for a long time. Additionally, these modern industrial agricultural techniques don't really care for the environment as well. So the soil itself is not really well protected. Instead, there's just more fertilizer added or more water is being used, and there's going to be more pollution of the surrounding areas. On the big farms, a lot of times you need a lot of labor, and they go for the cheapest labor often. That might be a migrant worker. They can take advantage of them, which is sad that some do, because they may not have, all of the same things available to them that many of us do. And actually, ironically, the costs of farming in this way are higher because you need to get more fertilizer, more water, but it's just a little bit easier, even though it's more expensive to farm industrially versus the more labor-intensive organic farming. So I mentioned that the topsoil can become degraded with not taking care of it. And one way this can happen is with heavy use of fertilizer or overwatering it. The salts that are present in small amounts in the irrigation water or in the fertilizer are going to build up over time. And this can lead to a situation where even though you've watered the soil, there's so much salt there that instead of having the water actually go into the roots, the plants can still lose water even when the soil is wet due to the fact that there's so much salt outside those roots. It basically sucks the water out essentially. And we'll talk about this process called osmosis later on in class. We'll do a lab actually dedicated to this process of osmosis and something called diffusion, which is a more general process of this similar type. So organic farming you can think of as like farming with nature. Again, organic means it's better for the environment. It's not perfect for the environment, but it's better than the industrial farming. Organic doesn't necessarily mean better for your health. In some instances, yes, that's true. With less pesticides, it can be better for your health. However, in terms of the actual nutrients present in the food, usually there's not much of a difference, if any, between organically farmed foods and industrial farmed foods. You might be surprised to hear this, but that's because companies are really good at marketing things in a way that's going to make you think that something's better for you, and even though it might not be any different in terms of the nutrient quality. So organic farms tend to try to integrate the plant side with the animal side. So for example, plant waste products that humans don't eat, you could feed to animals over here. And then waste products from animals, like manure, can be used to fertilize the soil, so you don't have to use don't have to use as much or any synthetic fertilizer. You're recycling those nutrients back and forth. Additionally, instead of using pesticides or to reduce pesticide usage, you can use natural pest management by introducing predators that will kill those pests. Again, you have to be careful when you're introducing a predator that it doesn't become an invasive species, because then you have a whole other problem on your hands. A few other techniques to highlight here. One of them is minimizing tilling. If you're not familiar with tilling, all that means is to turn the soil. So basically you've got a plow or some kind of a machine that turns up the soil so that roots can grow better in there, and you can get more water and air in the soil, which is important for plants to grow. And if you do a lot of this, the soil can just get blown away or washed away very easily. So you want to try to minimize it, but have enough so that the plants benefit. You also want to try to reduce water usage. Rather than having a sprinkler that sprays water out through the air, instead, some organic farms use what's called drip irrigation. Basically, you've got a hose like this, and you're running water through there. And you put that hose so it goes right along the base of the plants. And then you've got holes in that hose. You poke holes in there. And those holes, what happens is the water leaks out. And you get this slow leakage of water, and you don't have as much of it evaporating into the air. So drip irrigation, where it kind of drips out of those holes, is much more efficient. And additionally here, rather than planting a monoculture, mono means one. So a monoculture is where you have a single field with just one crop. You plant many different crops together. That's called intercropping, planting a variety of different crops together. Why is that beneficial? Well, first of all, pollinators like bees and birds and bats and butterflies, they benefit from having diverse food sources. So when they go and pollinate a plant, they are eating some of the pollen or the nectar. And that's important to have some diverse food for their health. Additionally, if you're a pest that eats these crops, and you have a whole field of your favorite food, it's like an all-you-can-eat buffet. But if instead you have different crops, you're like, oh man, I love broccoli, but oh, I hate tomatoes, those pests won't be as big of a problem. And so intercropping benefits in that way as well. It also is better for the soil. And then there's something called crop rotation. Crop rotation where instead of planting one crop in the same area year after year after year, you plant that crop there for 1 year, and then the next year you plant the crop in a different location, and you put a different crop there. You kind of reverse the crops back and forth over and over. By rotating crops, you help to keep the soil healthy, because each crop takes different things out of the soil and returns different things into the soil. So by rotating them, you're keeping the soil nice and healthy. So what is meant by sustainable agriculture? Well, sustainable agriculture has to protect the environment, but it also has to be beneficial for humans. Otherwise, we're not going to do it. So we need to get enough food, but not destroying the environment or using up all of our natural resources to do so. And so there's these three main considerations that are factoring in to sustainable agriculture. Economic, so the money of it. Social, having people who want to be involved in this. And environmental considerations. That's what we focused on mainly so far, is taking care of the environment. But these three things all have to come together to really have a sustainable system. So again, you need the business to be profitable. If farming doesn't make you enough money and you find it to be too hard of a lifestyle, you might not want to go into farming. Again, I saw a lot of friends who were farmers, and the lifestyles that they had, it wasn't desirable to me. It was really a tough life, and they didn't make much money. They got to get up really, really early. And so, yeah, you got to make sure it's economically viable. Social, the workers are treated well. People want to do this job. It helps to have a connection with your community. And we'll talk about some ways that farms are working to connect to local communities. And then taking care of the environment. We talked about that a lot. Maintaining healthy soil, using less water, reducing pollution, and now tying back to biodiversity, a past topic. If you can try to use intercropping, natural predators, try to reduce pesticides, you're going to have less adverse impacts on surrounding plant life and animal life, and that will then promote biodiversity as much as possible. So what can you specifically do? I always try as much as possible to tie this back into personal actions, little things that we can do to help. And so one way you can support sustainable farming is to grow food in pots. I have a friend who lives in an apartment with a balcony, and she grows herbs and strawberries out on her apartment balcony. I also know of an individual who goes to a community garden. It's a shared space where you can go and plant fruits and vegetables, grow them, and then harvest them for yourself. Additionally, buying organic produce from the store will support sustainable farms because organic is better for the environment. Unfortunately, organic produce is usually more expensive, so there's the practicality of it. You have to try to balance out, but there are, again, some organic foods where they're much better for your health in terms of less pesticides, and it's better for the environment. So whenever you can, if it's within your budget, consider buying organic. And then lastly, eating locally. Not only is this better for sustainable farming, but it's better for the environment. It reduces your ecological footprint. You have less fossil fuel emissions because of less distance to transport materials. And this creates this kind of community bond which satisfies the social aspect of sustainable farming. So one way to do this is when you're at the grocery store, look for signs that say this is locally grown or locally produced. Going to farmers markets. We are lucky that in this area we have a plethora of farmers markets. You can find one almost any day of the week if you look around a little bit. And they offer food sold directly from farmers. There's no middleman, so they get more profit in doing this. And again, farmers markets sometimes can be more expensive for certain products at least, but if you go at the right time of year and you pick the right items, you can actually in some cases find them for cheaper than the supermarkets. And I guarantee you they'll probably taste much better because they're fresher and more local typically. And then lastly, there's what's called a CSA program, Community Supported Agriculture. What that is you're essentially buying almost like a stock where you buy like in the stock market, you buy a share and you say, okay, I'm going to give you, I don't know, $200. For this $200, I expect that every month you're going to give me a certain percentage of the food that you grow. And you can sign up for this for just fruits and vegetables. You can also add meat, cheese, dairy products, eggs. And so what happens is if the farmer has a really, really good year, you get a lot of stuff each month. If unfortunately there's a drought or there's a big plague of insects that comes by, the farmer doesn't produce as much, you'll still get something, but not as much. So it helps to share in both the benefits and the risks of this, and it helps to make sure that farmers don't go under when they have things happen that are beyond their control, so these environmental factors. So there's different ways you can support sustainable farming. I hope you'll consider some of these, again, if they're within your budget or your means. And if not, maybe try to consider shifting some things around and just do like maybe one of these things. All right, that's it for this topic.